Okay, whoa, that's very loud. Let's get started. So we are on money and the interest rates. Next week is the economics department reading week, which means we have no classes next week whatsoever for this class, and we'll continue the week after. So where were we? We were on page 4. And we briefly went over the 3 functions of money, and importantly, we are going to define money to be anything that serves these 3 functions. So we've got the medium of exchange, which is if I want to buy something from you, I don't have to find something that you want. I can give you money. You don't really want money, but you want the things that money can buy. Right? And I give you this money, and then you can go off and you can use it to buy from someone else. Okay, so the whole reason that works, why I can go to a taxi driver and get a ride here, is because he thinks there's some other sucker who will take these euros. And that other sucker will take these euros because he thinks there's some other sucker who will take these euros. It's not that anyone wants euros per se, it's that we want to be able to buy stuff, and because in our society, euros are something that pretty much everybody takes, everyone's willing to accept them. We're only willing to accept them because other people are willing to accept them and we can buy the stuff we want. But that's super useful because if we have a medium of exchange like this, I can accept payment from you in something. I don't have to want that something, but I know that I can pass it on. And so that makes it much easier for us to conduct exchanges because you don't have to have something that I want. And you don't have to, not very many people want economics lectures, probably not even most of you, but yet I can make a living doing these economics lectures, and I can buy anything that society has to offer because people will accept the money. Right? And so this medium of exchange thing is super important, and this is in fact going to be our main use of money. We're going to focus on the medium of exchange as a use for money. But it is important to note that it has other uses as well. It's a unit of account. It's a way that we can compare values. We can compare the value of what you get for work with the value of all the stuff that you want to buy. We can compare various prices in the economy because they're all measured in the same thing, and that's super useful. And it also serves as a store of value. It serves as a store of value kind of trivially in that you can do work on a Monday and still buy stuff on a Friday. But it also serves as a store of value in our society more broadly in that you can do work in September and go on vacation in March, right? And you've stored the value of that labor in September until March. Now there's other ways you can store value as well, but this is something that money does for us that we use all the time, and it's important to realize that use is there. Okay. So at this stage, I would like you over the break to listen to this podcast. It's not very long, and I think it was pretty interesting. Planet Money, how 4 drinking buddies saved Brazil. And in fact, the way they did this is understanding these functions of money. Right? By understanding these functions of money, particularly the unit of account, they were able to stop hyperinflation in Brazil. I mean, it's back now, but at the time, they managed to do it. Now, listen to that. Okay. So now that we've defined money this broadly, money is anything that does these things, okay? Now we have to think, well, what is money really? Now that we have a definition, what kind of things are money? So back in the day, I have heard that archaeologists say that back in the day, I don't know if it's true, that Ireland, ancient Irish, used to use cattle as money. Now I think the cattle is a bit of a mistranslation. I do not think they thought Texas Longhorns. I think it's more like goats and sheep. I don't know. But livestock was used as money. Okay? And there's a number of societies where this is true. Just Ireland is the nearest and dearest to our hearts, so we pick on Ireland. So if you think about that, how does that work as money? Well, if we say that livestock are money, what we're saying is that they serve the uses of money, right? And so in particular, they're serving as a medium of exchange, they're serving as a unit of account, and they're serving as a store of value. So for a medium of exchange, suppose you have 100 goats and you want to buy someone's land or hire some mercenaries or whatever it is you want to do. You got your 100 goats. you can trade them for something. And if it's a medium of exchange, it's not that you're giving the goats to somebody who wants goats, but you would give the goats to somebody who doesn't necessarily want goats, but could trade those goats on. We've all heard of that, you know, back in the day, doctors would take chickens in payment for doctor services, right? And at some point they got too many chickens, but they could pass those chickens on for something else, in which case it becomes a medium of exchange. So just accepting payment in terms of chickens, not so money-like, but if you're accepting payment in terms of chickens and you don't use the chickens yourself, but you pass them on to someone else, that is serving as a medium of exchange very clearly, and that can happen. Now, it's not an ideal medium of exchange. There's a number of reasons for this. First of all, imagine today we had a society where money was goats and goats were money. And you wanted to go out and buy a stick of chewing gum. You're going to go out and buy some chewing gum. Well, that's clearly worth less than a whole goat. And so now you've got to give fractions of a goat. So you got to carry a big cleaver around with you and take a hoof off every time you want chewing gum. It's messy, it's disgusting, and it's a little cruel. And so maybe, you know, it's difficult for small transactions to really be done in goat. Right? It's only really a useful medium of exchange for larger transactions that are worth more than a goat. And so that's a real problem as a medium of exchange. Doesn't mean you can't use it as a medium of exchange. It just means lots of exchanges are going to be problematic with this. Right? Also, as a medium of exchange, we say, okay, that's worth 5 goats. Great, give me 5 goats. And we can say that because we're city people and we don't know nothing about no goats. But I was a hippie kid back in the day, and we were back to the land, and we had goats. And goats are not goats. Some goats are cute, and some goats are nasty. Most goats are nasty, actually. But some goats are cute, and some goats are healthy, and some goats are sickly. Some goats are male and ought to die, and some goats are female and ought to breed. I don't know. Apparently that's how it is with goats, right? And so you want milk from some, and some of them you can't get milk from. So a goat is not a goat is not a goat, right? They're all a bit different. Some are sickly, some are healthy, some are about to die, some aren't. And so it's quite a bit different than doing a euro exchange, right? I can go on eBay and say this thing is 50 euros, no problem. They'll accept my euros, no problem. If I go on to eBay and they say this thing is 2 goats, now we got to start discussing the particular goats and how they are. Right, what their nature is and how sickly they are, how much goatage we get left out of them in their lifetime, and all of that. So it's a difficult medium of exchange. However, it can and has been done. Unit of account, the same way. You can say something's worth 50 goats, but again, goat's not a goat, it's not. Oh, you can come up with a standard goat, like a 1-year-old goat in good condition, female, right? Whatever your standard goat is, you can come up with that, and then measure everything in terms of goats, and that would work. And you say chewing gum is worth 1/50th of a goat, and you know you could do that. It's possible, but you can see a little awkward, right? It's not as easy as doing using euros. Store of value, though. Store of value, goats are great because goats pay interest. You get 50 goats and you come back in a year and you got 75 goats, right? So goats are lovely in that way. They do take care, though. You can't just like leave them and come back in a year and expect to have more goats. You'll have no goats at the end. Whereas you can take all your euros and stick it under your mattress, and you got the same number of euros that you did at the end, if they don't get stolen. Whereas your goats, they might die, they might breed, you don't know. And if you take care of them, they're great. If you don't take care of them, not so much so. So as a store of value, it's kind of a mixed bag in goats. Okay? Now, I go through this whole rigmarole just to say that these things are never cut and dried, right? It is complicated. Life is complicated. But we can think of things in these terms and say, how good of a money is it? Well, it's good in some ways. It's not good in other ways. So here, I'm going to go through the history of money. And I really enjoy giving this part of the lecture. This is so fun for, I don't know what you guys think. That's your problem. But I enjoy it. But I want to say at the outset, as we go through and say, sort of, where have we been historically in terms of what money is and what serves as money, that all of this is kind of has truthiness. There's some truth to it, but very little of what I'm going to say in the next 2 lectures is never exactly true, right? The world is going to be more complicated than that. Things happened at different times. Things happened and then reverted back and then happened again. things are messier than I'm going to say, but just to give you a broad overview of sort of how money has come to be in our society. And the point of this is, first of all, as a human, you should know, like as humans, where have we started from and where have we gone in sort of economic terms. That's well worth knowing. And secondly, there's things going on today that are super new, like super, super new to the world, never seen before in, the 20,000 years of human existence. I'm sorry, yeah, 20,000? We'll stick with 20,000 anyway. This is as far as back as we can kind of trace money. There's things that are really new and we don't know how they're going to work out. And so having a broad perspective allows you to see that, and having a broad perspective allows you to see sort of how we evaluate money and sort of a bit how to think about this term money, which we are, again, redefining, right? It doesn't mean what it means in English anymore. It means this stuff. It means anything that serves these functions of money, which is different from English. Right? Okay, so back in the day, like way back as far as we can tell in recorded history, we had commodity money. And that's things like the goats. Things that are used in everyday society, they're a commodity, they're things of value that normal people would like to use, but they also serve as a medium of exchange. You can imagine, for example, if we're in a farming society where everybody keeps chickens and everyone has a chicken hutch in their backyard, like hippie society if you're in the 70s like me. Right? If you're back in the 70s and we're all hippies together, we all have a chicken hutch in the backyard and that's just a thing, right? And so then if someone comes over and helps you out, you can pay them in a chicken, right? Because you know that they have a place to put the chicken and it's easy enough for them to pass on the chicken as well. So chickens can serve as a medium of exchange pretty easily because we all have chickens anyway. We're all using chickens anyway. All right. So that's been the mist of time. And the downside of this, well, there's a number of downsides of this. One, this is something we're all using anyway, right? And so if we're using it as money and I start keeping chickens just to sort of have my wealth, right, then I got a lot of chickens in my backyard that I'm not really using. And those chickens are kind of taken out of circulation because I'm hoarding them as wealth rather than wanting the eggs or anything like that. And that can create problems. And particularly it can create problems when you go into things like famines and all of a sudden there's a couple of rich guys hoarding all the chickens and the people that are starving don't get to eat the chickens, right? This is a problem. And also commodity money lots of times is not divisible in an easy way, right? We have the problem of the goat. If you want to buy chewing gum, you got to chop off the hoof. This is an issue, right? And you get all the problems of divisibility and storage and all of these things, right? Because it's something that you're using anyway in society, and the different commodity monies depend very much on the society, right? In my hippie society, everyone has chickens, so it's very natural to use chickens as money. But different societies have different things. Ancient Ireland, very famously, I'm saying the goats, the cattle, whatever they were. Divisibility is a problem, and the main problem is that it's something that everyone's using anyway, and so it interferes with that market. Another problem with this is that the government's not involved. And suppose you were a warlord, and warlord being the guy with the big stick that can whack people on the head when they don't do it as they're told. Big warlord, you're getting none of this. They're getting no benefit out of this. So pretty quickly, let me leave the warlord out of it for a minute. We'll come back to the warlord. We switched to metallic money. And if you think metallic money, and if you're like me, you played way too much D&D in your youth, you're naturally thinking gold and silver and bronze. But you're mostly thinking gold and silver, right? And that's, as our sort of European tradition, that's the thing. But there are Asian areas that use jade as metallic money. Metallic money just means it's something that is not commonly used in society. It probably has a value in and of itself, but mostly isn't commonly used as a society that we switch over and start using as money, right? And the nice thing about this is it can be something that's easily divisible, like gold or jade. You can cut it in half, and that's nice, so you can make small payments. Something that's not going to interfere with the normal behavior of people eating the chickens, right? It's something that, yeah, it might be used, like gold has industrial uses and art uses and stuff, but by and large, most of us in society aren't using gold, and so using gold doesn't screw with too much of society. So it's not necessarily a metal, but if you think gold, you're not wrong, right? At least here. Very famously, there's the island of Yap, where they used stones as money. They had these giant carved stones. There were no giant stones on the island, so they would go hundreds of miles by boat, and they would get these carved giant stones with like holes in the center, and they would sort of float them back to the island, and that would be money. And everyone would know that I owned 1/10 of the stone and you owned 2/10 of the stone, and we would trade those stones around. That would be metallic money. Even though it is literally stone, it's metallic money because it's not used so much in daily society, and it's a way that we can keep track of who owns what, and we can trade it back and forth between each other. It can serve as a medium of exchange. Okay. Now, we pretend like this is old news, but in fact, here is pictures. These girls, well, these ladies, they're school teachers in Eastern Europe. I believe they're in Russia. This picture was given to me by a student last year. This is a thing that happened in the 90s, right? They had hyperinflation in Russia after the fall of the USSR, and the poor school teachers, they had to get paid in vodka. So vodka is a commodity money, right? It's something, presumably they're all drinking vodka. I know this woman was drinking vodka before this happened. All been drinking vodka, and now they're getting paid in vodka. And you can see, like here we got a senior teacher, here we got a junior teacher getting paid more or less. And she's looking like, I've seen some crap in my days, but this is the worst. But there it is, it's a commodity money. Right? It's something that's used in society, but because the ruble broke down and that was no longer being used, they switched back to commodity money, going to an older style of money. And that way people could get paid for their services, the kids still could get taught, and yet the ruble was useless, no one was going to accept the ruble, but they would accept this vodka. Okay. Okay. Now, a trouble with metallic money that you get pretty much all the time is a debasing of the currency. And it's nice to talk about debasing of the currency here with this vodka example, because if this went on for a while, you can see the problem with vodka is that you could easily, put a little water in each of these jars, right? And then you start out with 10 vodkas, and all of a sudden you'd have 11. Get an empty bottle, and you wouldn't actually be getting paid as much vodka as you thought you were, right? And this happened with gold as well. So let's stick with gold because that's sort of our tradition. I don't know yours, but broadly European tradition is gold as money, as our metallic money. In order for gold to work, you can't just be having gold coins because gold is a really soft metal. Even if you sort of rub it on your trousers, a bit of it will come off in the fabric. It's really soft. So you need to put something in it so that it has some kind of solidity so that it doesn't, chip off and it doesn't rub off. And so you need to put in what's called a base metal. Tin, I think, is the usual one. Right? A base metal, meaning not a gold sort of metal, right? Not something valuable, something cheap that just gives the metal more solidity and so it doesn't just rub off, right? So you put in some base metal. So when you get your actual coin, it is only 90% gold. It is not 100% gold because 100% gold is not practical, right? And so there's some base metal in there. Now, what happens very quickly when we get these metallic monies is that the local warlord gets involved, right? And because when you're getting your gold coin, let's stick with gold. When you're getting your gold coin or your vodka, you don't know how much vodka or gold is actually in there. Now there are ways to find out. You can take a swig and find out, or you can do some metal tests to find out how much gold is in your gold coin. But you have to know how much a base metal versus gold is in there, or how much water versus alcohol is in your vodka. You have to know this, and this is a difficult problem. In everyday transactions, you don't want to be screwing around with this, right? You don't want to be like, take a little bit of the vodka out, we'll set it on fire and see the temperature that it burns at. You don't want to have little strips that you put on your gold to find out how much gold content is in there. I was selling in Turkey, my grandmother gave me a gold coin for my wedding. Right? And they had never seen this gold coin. It was a South African coin, and they were used to Turkish coins. So the guy took it, he threw it against the wall, saw whether it got dented, and then he put it in water, saw how much water was displaced. He weighed it to find out how much gold. Like he had a little rigmarole to find out what percentage of gold was in there, and that was fine. Okay. But you don't want to do that for every transaction, right? For every stick of gum you buy, you don't want to be going through this thing. Like, oh, these ladies, are they going to really do some kind of burning test to find out how much alcohol is in their vodka each and every time they get paid? They're not going to want to. They might have to, right? And so what happens is governments get involved really quickly. And back in the day, the government was just whoever had the sword in your local neighborhood. Your local warlord guy would get involved, government. Right? He'd go on, he'd take this gold, and he'd stamp his little face on it. And then, if you saw the little face, you would know how much gold was in that coin. Right? Here, I am betting, I can't zoom in, but I'm betting there's little labels over the top. Right, little government labels certifying that this is coming from the factory and the seal hasn't been broken and this kind of thing, which is exactly the same thing. The government involves certifying how much alcohol is in this thing. Right. Now, all of these things are helpful. It's very helpful that the government's involved, stamping their face on this, because that means for little transactions, you don't have to check how much gold is in the thing, how much alcohol is in the thing. It does still leave room for counterfeiters, right? You could come along and say, if everyone's using vodka for money, you could get a whole bunch of vodkas, you could carefully remove the label. You could transfer 50% vodka to a whole bunch of little empty bottles and fill the rest with water, and then you could carefully forge a label to go back over that, and you could forge this money. Right? Same thing with gold, right? You could take all these coins, you could melt them down, you could put a bunch more base metal, bunch more tin in there, debasing the currency, and you could have twice as many gold coins at the end of this. Stamp the guy's face on every one, and so really, really quickly, this becomes illegal, right? So if you want to take the money and add more base metal, creating more coins out of the same amount of gold, that's illegal. Right, this is counterfeiting. We still have this law today. Nothing has changed. You cannot take your euro note and go to the photocopy machine and copy it up. Well, you can, but jail is waiting for you. And like, of all the crimes, you can go on a murder spree, they will not treat it as harshly as they will the counterfeiting. Like, they're really rough on counterfeiters. And they were back in the day, too. Like, if you started stamping that guy's face on coins that weren't his, you were definitely dead. Like, this is universal worldwide. You're definitely dead. Nothing good will happen to you. And it's also true back in Russia, back in the 90s, right? If you start doctoring the labels, and this is true here, too, doctoring labels on alcohol, yeah, you're definitely going to jail, right? There's no hope for you. It's exactly the same sort of thing, okay? On the other hand, suppose you were your local warlord, and everything's going fine, and you've been stamping your little face on all these coins, and everything's going good. That's a service to your community, right? Because now everybody knows that this has good gold content in it, so that makes all their transactions easier and better and simpler. It serves as a better medium of exchange now, because we don't have to test the gold content each time. But then you think, well, there's a war on, because I am, after all, a warlord. So I got to be lord of something, so we got to have a war. And so we got our local war, and we have huge expenses, because we got to hire mercenaries and make swords and all that stuff, and we're just a little short of cash. One tempting thing to do is to debase the currency, right? I can collect a whole bunch of coins, I can melt them down, I can add some tin to them, add some base metal to them, and now I all of a sudden have more coins than I did before with a debased currency. It's basically, I'm printing money, right? And then I can go out and use those coins to buy a bunch of stuff, right? And what you'll see, this, by the way, is called seigniorage. The value that I create, the value I appropriate to myself because I debase the currency, is seigniorage. Seigneur comes from the sovereign, and it's sort of the benefit the king gets from being in control of the money supply. Right? You can imagine yourself, like, if for your birthday, you've been a very, very good student, and your teacher comes and gives you a printing press that will print euros. Very good birthday present, if I do say so myself. And a little certificate that allows you to do it legally. Well, what would you do? You would say, thank you, Ivan, it's been very nice to have you, please leave, and you would immediately start printing euros. Would you not? Of course you would. I would too. You'd be printing euros like all night. You wouldn't sleep. You just print euros, print yourself a couple million euros overnight, wait for them to dry, and go out and buy stuff, right? That's what you would do. That's what I would do. And so you've gone out and bought stuff. All of a sudden, more stuff has come to you, which means there's only a certain amount of stuff out there. Nothing in this little exchange has created new wealth. And so what you've done is you've taken wealth that used to go to other people, and now it's coming to you because you printed all this stuff. Right? It is kind of a form of a tax. And the way this tax works is you go out and buy stuff, and in order to buy stuff, you bid up the price. And so the price of this good goes up, and you get it because you printed all this money, which means someone else can't afford to get it because the price is now higher. Okay? So it's appropriating wealth, it's appropriating stuff away from other people towards the person who can print the money. Because nothing gets created in this process, right? We're just reappropriating it. And this is why, one of the reasons why it's always illegal to do this on your own, because you're taking the wealth from other people and bringing it toward yourself, right? But the government can do that because he's the guy with the sword. He said nobody can put their stamp on this coin except for me, but I can still do it. And so if he puts half as much gold in each coin, he is going to appropriate a bunch of wealth in just the same way you would if you had the printing press. And other people wouldn't get that. And that's very useful because there's a war on. For goodness sake, have some patriotism. I don't know what you're whining about. So we're going to appropriate this wealth. We're going to use it for mercenaries and swords and whatnot. And that means it's taken away from other people. So it is a form of a tax. Right? This sort of printing of money, minting of new coins, this debasement of the currency is a tax on everybody else. It's a very indirect tax, but it's taking wealth from the people, and bringing it towards the government in this case. Okay? If you're a counterfeiter, it's taking wealth away from the people and towards you personally, which is lovely for you before you go to jail. And so very quickly, you'll find that every country, like during wartime, you have seigniorage, that they debase the currency, and they print up a bunch of these euros, well, not euros, these gold coins, and they, and they sort of appropriated wealth for the war effort, right? And this happens over and over again. I know this guy, Şebnem Pamuk, who is the brother of Orhan Pamuk, the Nobel Prize in Literature guy. But Şebnem is an economic historian, and he has a superpower. And his superpower as an economic historian is that he reads Ottoman. And Ottoman is this weird mishmash language from back in the day, from the Ottoman Empire, where it's kind of Arabic, it's kind of Persian, it's kind of Turkish, it's all sort of in-betweeny, and they got their own words for all sorts of stuff. And so it's like nobody speaks this language, nobody reads this language, just a few guys can speak and read this language, and he's one. And the beauty of Ottoman is that the Ottoman Empire was around forever, and they wrote everything down. And so there's huge warehouses full of ancient Ottoman documents that very few people can read, but he can. And so he was looking into this seigniorage issue as an economic historian, and he was looking at the currency that was issued. And lo and behold, every war, they debase the currency. Right? They have less gold in the coins during and after the war than they had in the coins before the war. Okay? Happens over and over and over and over again. But an interesting feature that he found, for 3 to 5 years after the debasement of the currency, the counterfeiters would be putting out better coins than the government. Because the counterfeiters didn't realize that the currency was debased, right? And so they're keeping with the old coins. And they're saying, like, let me take the coin and make it 90% as much gold. Now, they weren't too greedy, because it changes the character of the coin. So they would cut back on the gold content a little. But when so they were, knocking it down by 10%, knocking it down by 10%, knocking it down by 10%. But when the war came, the government would knock it down by 50%, right? Just be brutal about it, because the counterfeiters didn't want to get caught, but the government didn't care. Like, the government's rules, they can do what they like. So the counterfeiters would have better coins than the actual government each and every time. For hundreds of years, this happened. Okay? But this is not particularly an Ottoman thing. It's just we have the data on Ottomans. But this happens over and over again every war. Okay. So that went on in various forms for thousands of years, like various combinations of commodity money and metallic money, various forms of metallic money, various debasements of the currency, and so forth. Until a little bit with the Venetians, but much, from our point of view, probably a little later, we got a new thing, which is banknotes. And banknotes, now we're really in the modern era here. We're in the 1700s, right? It's late 16, early 1700s. And it varies from country to country, et cetera, et cetera. Truthy, it's not literal. But in that kind of time frame, what happens is people start saying, well, I got all this gold. Well, some wealth starts getting accumulated, right? And people got all this gold and silver and whatnot, and it's just sitting around in their mattress, and it's not very snuggly. And so they got the hard pillow, and they're just all full of gold, and they say, this isn't super secure. It's expensive to hire the guards and whatnot. What I would like is I would like a nice, safe place to put my gold. And people say, I got a service for you. And they build a giant bank vault, and they say, come, put your money here. And these are banks, right? And people take their cash and they put it there because that's a nice, safe, secure place to have it. And the banks, as we'll see, can do some stuff with it. We'll see what happens where they make their profit in a bit. But we have these banks that are holding on to all the coins, right? Lovely. And so then you say, well, I still want to spend some money. And so you get some coins, and you're walking around with them, and just like in D&D, they're jingling and jangling, and you get the purse heavy with coin and all of that stuff. But it's awkward, right? It's awkward to carry around loads and loads of coins, right? And this becomes a problem. The coins are rubbing against each other, so they're knocking bits and pieces of the gold off of each other, and it's just heavy and awkward, and it's prone to being stolen. And so if you have like a big transaction, you say, I'm going to buy a horse. I'm going to buy a horse. Let me get a whole box full of coins and somehow transport it across town, maybe hire a security guard. It's a pain, right? And so what you do is the bank says, hold it. Now, don't be hanging out with that other bank, but come with me. I'm a good bank. I will give you a note. I will give you a note from the bank, and that note will say, bring this note back to the bank, and whoever brings it back, I'll give them the coins. And so the idea was that you would take this note from the bank, pay for your horse. The horse guy would then go into the bank, and they would credit that to his account. And that way, nobody has to carry this gold across town. All the awkwardness, the heaviness, the danger, all that's gone, because we're just transporting this little banknote. You don't make a scene by carrying a big box. You can have the note just stuck in your pocket. And so banks would start issuing notes like this. And it started out just being big things. Like the Venetians did this, but they did this for big things, like, here's enough to buy a ship. But as we went along, the banks would do this for smaller and smaller transactions, and you would get these fairly small banknotes. Okay? Notes from your bank, that's all it is. And then what would happen is you would go and buy your horse, and then the horse guy would say, well, I could take it into the bank, but I'm not really going to the bank. Let me take this, and I was selling the horse so I could afford to buy, feed for my other horses. So let me just take that banknote directly and give it to the feed guy. And that way I save myself a trip to the bank, right? Lovely. So he takes the note and he transfers it over to the feed guy. And the feed guy now has the thing, and he says, great, now I can buy a mule so that I can plow the fields better and whatnot. And so he just passes it on. And all of a sudden, these banknotes start being used as a medium of exchange, right? I am accepting the banknote, not because I want the banknote, but because I know somebody else will accept the banknote. Okay? And here, no governments are involved anywhere in this process. Right? We're just swapping these banknotes around. It only has to do with you, me, and AIB. Right? AIB issues the banknotes, and we just swap them amongst ourselves. And they would go out and they would be gone for 10, 15, 20 transactions before they would come back to the bank. So they really were serving as a medium of exchange. And if you travel to Northern Ireland, you will find that the British pounds there, I'm sure you've all seen this, right? You look at them. The British pounds there have actual commercial banks, little labels on them, right? They're saying Ulster Bank, right? There'll be a little Ulster Bank logo on the thing. And this is hearkening back to this banknote days, because back in the day, banks were the one that were printing these banknotes. Now, these days, governments have horned their way in on this, and the banks don't do this anymore in the same way. But just as a historical leftover, in Northern Ireland, they still print the names of the bank on the banknotes. It doesn't mean anything there anymore, but it used to be because of these banknote issuing. Right? And so this is the invention of paper money. Right? It is being used as a stand-in for the gold. The gold is still the real money, but people are switching around these little slips of paper. Right? And then, of course, governments being the way they are, how are we doing? Governments being the way they are, they want in on the action. And so in order to get in on the action, what did they do? Well, they issue their own banknotes. Right? It's because they see that it's like a huge convenience to be going around and not having to carry the gold. And so what they do is they issue these slips of paper, and those slips of paper are stand-in for the gold. And this is the gold standard. The gold standard is that the government's putting out these slips of paper, but we're really still operating in gold. The slips of paper are just a stand-in. And if you come in and say, take your slip of paper and bring it to the central bank, we'll talk about, but to the government, if you bring it to the government, they will give you the gold in exchange. And if you bring them gold, they'll give you a slip of paper. But the slips of paper are just so much more convenient, as you might guess, and so everyone keeps holding the slips of paper, and everyone stops using the gold in its physical form. Now they're using it at sort of a metaphorical form because they have these stand-in slips of paper. And everyone just starts swapping these things. But it's okay, we're still using gold because these are just stand-ins for the gold that exists somewhere in the vault. Okay. And you will see, like in the UK, it is of course a pound sterling. What does that mean? Well, back in the day, 1 pound sterling, you brought it in and they would give you a pound of sterling silver. They were on the silver standard, which we still call the gold standard. It's just, it doesn't matter that it's gold, it matters that it's some metallic money out there that this note is standing in for. Okay. And now, of course, if you bring it in, it's not worth a pound of silver anymore, but back in the day, it was a pound of silver if you bring in your pound sterling. Okay. Now, the gold standard has some troubles. There's some troubles with gold as money or any metallic money. And the big trouble with metallic money is that the amount of money that's out there doesn't respond in any way to economic conditions. And so a couple of troubles you can have. Like in the US for a while, we had this trouble where they discovered all this gold in California. And all of a sudden, loads of gold came into the economy. And so the money started to be worth less than it was before because there was just more gold in the same amount of stuff. Same thing happened in Europe, in the 1600s? When the Portuguese and the Spanish started bringing in tons of gold from their slave operations in South America, they're bringing in tons and tons of gold and just swamped, first of all, their economies. They had hyperinflation, well, not hyperinflation, but very serious inflation. And then, of course, all that gold leaked over to the rest of Europe and caused inflation elsewhere as well. And so all this money, all this gold coming in without a corresponding increase in the amount of stuff that there was to buy meant that the prices start going up and you get this inflation. Okay? Just based on external circumstances, whether we find gold or don't find gold, whether we enslave an entire people or we don't enslave. Obviously we're going to enslave an entire people. It's just what we do. But we get all this gold coming in, right? Okay. Another thing that can happen is the opposite. And that is in the mid-1800s in the US, and other places as well, but mainly in the US, we had huge growth in the economy, loads of immigrants, lots of stuff was being produced, but there was not an increase in the amount of money. So then we have the same amount of money chasing after more goods, and goods become relatively less expensive. We get deflation. Prices start going down because the economy is growing, but the supply of money is not. Right? Which means that we have money lowering in prices. And so, for example, farmers, and this is where the big political troubles were, farmers very often are borrowing money. Right? They borrow money for seeds for the next year. They borrow money for the machinery to run the farm. They borrow money to buy the farm in the first place. And so farmers, particularly small farmers, are very often in debt. And so they negotiate some interest rate, and then you have deflation, and the real cost of what they have to pay back is going up. They borrowed enough for one machine. At the end of the year, because prices have gone down, they have to pay back enough for 5 machines. And so farmers got into huge amounts of trouble, which is a huge voting block. So we get William Jennings Bryan with his Cross of Gold speech. He's saying that we shouldn't just use gold, we should use silver as well, sort of bimetal, 2 metals serving as our gold standard, some combination of the two, right? Like UK was on a silver gold standard, US was on a gold standard, but he said the US should be on sort of a joint metal gold standard. And the point of this is that this would cause there to be much more money, which would deal with this deflation problem, okay? This was a huge political thing that he was the standard bearer for one of the parties, just barely lost. He is also famous, if you ever see the movie Inherit the Wind, he was the lawyer who was arguing that God created the earth, I think 12 days ago or whatever it was when he created the earth, and therefore we shouldn't teach evolution. So there was like the Scopes monkey trial was a huge thing against another great figure in American history, Clarence Darrow. So he's like a bit of a guy, but he became like a big star because of this bimetallism, which is just to say, not that you need to know who William Jennings Bryan is or any goofy American history, but that this gold standard had problems. And the gold standard has problems because we can't control how much money is out there. Sometimes there's too much, in which case we get inflation. Sometimes there's too little, in which case we get deflation. It's not under our control, right? So external forces, random events like finding gold or not finding gold can really screw up the economy. And people care a lot, enough to carry this fat guy around the place. So they care a lot. Okay. Nobody cares directly, like very few, just kooks care directly, economists and kooks. But indirectly, it has big effects on the economy, can have big effects on the economy. Okay, so that was sort of our situation up to 1900. Oh, yeah. So up to 1900, we were on various forms of the gold standard, right? Bimetal, a silver version, a gold version, but money was backed up by gold in a vault somewhere, by some metallic money in a vault somewhere. And the nice thing about a metallic money in a vault somewhere is that the government can't just say, I need cash and let me print more, because you need to have the gold from somewhere, right? And there was always issues like during war. You kind of get into a war, right? UK gets into the Boer War, they need some cash. Just like every warlord since the dawn of time, they want to debase the currency. And they can do this by just saying, okay, it used to be a pound sterling. Like if you have a British pound, you get a pound of sterling silver. Now you only get, 9/10 of a pound. We're still going to call it a pound sterling, but you don't get as much silver as you did before. So you can just debase the currency just overnight just by saying that, right? And they did that. Every war they would do that. Like they did since the dawn of time, right? But by and large, that wasn't different from what they were doing since the dawn of time. So, there you go. Okay. Then along comes World War I. And World War I, it turns out, and this might be a shock to you, but it turns out World War I was a big war. And like people really, really, really needed money fast. And there was a lot of tanks to buy, a lot of mustard gas to buy, lots of trench digging tools to buy. There were expenses, right? And so they needed cash quickly. All the boys were off fighting the war. And so, where are you going to get the cash from? They're barely making enough to live on at home to begin with. So what do? I say, well, the natural thing to do is to debase the currency. That way we get the seigniorage, that way we can buy all the stuff. And they say, look, we're going to stop converting British pounds into silver. We're just going to stop altogether for the duration of the emergency. It's just a war. For the duration of the war, we're going to stop doing that. And now, for the duration of the war, it's just a slip of paper. But after the war is over, we're going to go back to converting it into silver. So don't worry, it's still a real thing. But if you have any patriotic bone in your body and you don't want our boys to die out there on the front, really you got to go along with this. And so basically everybody did. Okay? And all the major players in World War I, they all ceased converting their money into, their paper money into gold. They all do this. Germany, US, France, they all drop it. Okay? And then at the end of the war, they go, okay, we didn't have any troubles there, but we're at the end of the war, the emergency is over, let's go back to converting the pound sterling, the pound into sterling silver. Now they're at a new rate, right? It's not that they're converting it at the same amount of silver that it was before, but there's some amount of silver that you can bring your pound in and get the silver and vice versa. Okay? And so we're back on the gold standard. Debased currency, because war and patriotism, like, don't start with me with your unpatriotic whining. No, we're back here, everything's stable, let's continue life, right? And they all do that, except for Germany. And Germany can't do that. Because first of all, in their last ditch effort to try not to lose, they spent all their gold, so they got no gold in the vault. And then in the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I, they imposed very punitive reparations. So Germany owes tons of money to the Allies. Right, so they owe tons of money, and so there's no way they can get that kind of cash into the vault. They just can't get the gold. And so they can't get the gold, so they don't convert marks back into gold. So marks are just marks, right? And what happens is they're in desperate need for cash because they owe all this money to the Allies, and also they have to rebuild their economy and all of that. And so they start printing money. So there's nothing to stop them from printing more because it's not backed by gold. And so they just print off a few more marks in exactly the same way as you would do if you had a euro printing press in your basement. You would just print off euros so that you could go buy stuff. The German government does the same thing. It prints off Deutschmarks so that it can go buy stuff. And it desperately needs to buy stuff, so it keeps doing this. And it's printing more and more and more euros. But of course, just printing euros doesn't create more stuff, right? And so what's happening is the government is pumping these euros into the economy. They're buying something with the euros, lovely for them. Not euros, I'm sorry, they're pumping Deutschmarks into the economy. They're buying something, they get the something. The people no longer have that something, so the people are giving stuff to the government. And as they're doing that, the price of everything is going up. And as the price starts going up, they have to print more Deutschmarks to keep the thing going. And the prices keep going up, and they have to print more Deutschmarks. And it's just a self-reinforcing cycle, and pretty soon they get hyperinflation. They get inflation so high that factory workers would be let go 3 times a day. So you would work for an hour and a half, you would get paid, you would go out and shop, and then you would go back to work, you would get paid again, you would go out to shop, and then you would go back to work, you'd get paid again, and at the end of the day, you'd shop again. Right? And this is because if we paid them at the end of the day, everything would have gone up in price so much that their morning's work would be worthless. People were wallpapering their houses with Deutschmarks because it was cheaper to use the money for wallpaper than it was to actually buy wallpaper. People would go around, like normal, everyday, low-income workers would go around with wheelbarrows full of Deutschmarks trying to shop. Like, it was super high inflation. It was a disaster. And you can imagine stories of, and here's a fun story you can imagine. World War I flying aces got the Iron Cross, now on a pension, completely destitute because his pension is 3 marks a month, but marks are worthless now. And so he's starving in the street. Right, you can imagine all these things and you would not be wrong. Like you have grandmothers starving in the street, you have people eating their dogs, you have all the horrors of deep, horrible poverty because of this hyperinflation. Like some people that were on fixed income were totally devastated. There was nothing they could do. Like an old person, they're doomed. Like if they don't have people to take care of them, they're literally doomed and they just died. Right? And this was a big, big deal. Right? It was a big, big deal in a number of ways. First of all, if you died, obviously it's a big deal to you personally. And if somebody eats you and you're just a dog, very sad for you as well. But it's also a big deal sort of in a broader sense in that everyone looked at Germany and said, my God, that's a horror. This is what happens when you don't have the gold standard. Right? When money is just something that you print, hellscape. Right? This is not good. And the Germans looked at this and they became, like as a people, horrified by inflation. Right? And this is why today the Germans are in charge basically of the European Central Bank. Because when we're all getting together to create a central bank between us, first of all, the Germans were very leery of this because they didn't trust the Italians and the Irish to like keep things under control, like inflation-wise, and they were very, very worried about inflation because, you know, their grandmother died and she ate her dog and all that back in the day, and it was personal to them. And all the rest of Europe was kind of not like, obviously we don't want Germans in charge of stuff, that's disgusting. But on the other hand, the Germans care a lot about inflation. And that's a good thing in a central banker. So we weren't actually that against the Germans being in charge of the central bank because, yeah, it's not bad if they control inflation, right? And they care about inflation. And so that's how they ended up with so much power on the central bank, because they cared a lot and because people kind of trusted them, like as a society, to care about inflation a lot. And so it was something that we were willing to do, and that's because of this post-World War I hyperinflation. And of course it had other negative side effects that like society kind of broke down, and like as people's grandmothers are starving, they kind of get desperate and they're willing to vote for anyone, and all of a sudden you get Hitler, and I've heard bad things came of that. And so all of that is partly reparations and partly this was blamed at the time on this not having gold backing up our money. Okay, I need to let you go. We'll stop here, and we'll do the 20th century next time. Okay. See you in a week.